So the brilliant Citizen Kane. So I mentioned before that both William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer have had their names. Their names are still prominent in different ways today. One little side note is you guys probably never heard of this. Patty Hearst, I believe, is the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst. In the 60s, she was kidnapped from her home, I think in Connecticut, by something called the Symbionese Liberation Army, which was a counterculture revolutionary group of people who robbed banks. So she became kind of a convert to this strange cult for a while. Here's a picture of her with some kind of automatic weapon in her soldier's garb. I think she's now back to being living the Hearst life in Connecticut, but it was a little kind of a strange way for her family's name to be in the news. This is the Hearst building in New York City. It's on, I want to say 57th Street, I believe. Yep. Right around 8th Avenue, 9th Avenue. The Hearst Corporation is still a mighty big media company. They publish a lot of magazines, including Cosmopolitan, which some of you may have heard of, but lots of others. Esquire is their magazine. You may have heard of that. They also own a lot of TV stations. So still a successful media company. And, of course, the way Joseph Pulitzer's name is known is a little different. His name is on the Pulitzer Prizes. We're going to open up a link here to Pulitzer Prize winners by year. At least I hope we're going to open it. Whoop. Are we opening it? There we go. And Pulitzer Prizes are given for reporting. Here are the 2019 Pulitzer Prizes. So I'm making a point of showing you this to show you that newspapers tend to win the most Pulitzer Prizes for reporting. Here's public service. The South Florida Sun Sentinel newspaper ran an article about exposing the failings of school and law enforcement officials before and after the shooting rampage at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Everyone remembers that, I think. Here's one for breaking news reporting. This one was for the coverage of the massacre at Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue. And then investigative reporting is, here are the winners for that from the Los Angeles Times, on reporting about a University of Southern California doctor who violated hundreds of young women for more than a quarter century. You may have heard of that case. Explanatory reporting, you see here's the New York Times for an 18-month investigation into Donald Trump's finances prior to being president. Local reporting, national reporting. So you'll see that ProPublica, I think, is a website, and that's the first non-newspaper Pulitzer. St. Louis Post-Dispatch is another great old newspaper. Washington Post, editorials. So this is just to make the point that newspaper reporters win these prizes, and they win the prizes for stories that have a big impact on our country and on our world and on our lives. And so as we see the decline of newspapers, we see them not employing as many reporters, and that means we are going to not get these type of stories, or we'll get fewer and fewer of them. And what impact does that have on us and on our world? And I'd say it's not a good one. Okay. Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst still influencing our world. Here's a shot of a newsroom. You don't see too many women in there. This is probably, I'm just going to guess, this is the 40s, 50s. I seem to be going backwards. Sorry, everybody. I'm not going to embed these videos in the presentation, but these are just some videos I pulled from some films over the last 50, 60 years showing the life of reporters. His Girl Friday is about a woman who's getting into the newspaper business, and it's a pretty terrific film from the 30s with Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell, two great stars. All the President's Men was made, I want to say, in the 70s. It's about Watergate. Some of you may have heard of that presidential scandal. Ending up the reporters from the Washington Post digging up the truth about Watergate, which results in the President Nixon at that time, resigning before he was going to be impeached and probably found guilty and thrown out of office for trying to interfere in the presidential election in ways he shouldn't have done, and then trying to cover it up. And then Spotlight has got some folks. This one just came out a few years ago. This is another true story about investigative reporting. This is the Boston paper up there, Boston Globe. And this has to do with reporters digging up the Catholic priests' abuse of children in the Boston area. And this also led to some amazing things coming out about the Catholic Church all over the world. And anyway, so the links are there if you'd like to watch just a quick little squib on each of these, particularly if you haven't seen some of these earlier movies. You see how newspaper reporting is, I guess you could say, romanticized in films and in popular culture. Journalism and the movies. I actually pulled all of these from the Movie Channel. It ran in March last year. They had a month of showing journalism in movies. Here's some other true, real reporters. These are two New Yorkers, one named Pete Hamill, one named Jimmy Breslin. Jimmy Breslin won the Pulitzer. Looks like they're sitting right outside the ladies' room somewhere. I don't know. Anyway, these guys, this is probably, I would say, the 70s, based on the hairstyles. I'm going to pull this one up, too. Another little interesting side note about newspapers. You know, newspapers, how do they get from the printing press to your home? Well, a lot of us had paper routes. I never actually had my own route as a kid, but I had friends who did, and I would take over. I would help some days. I used to help in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I lived for quite a while, and I even helped my friend Doug Coward, who had a paper route in Berkeley, California, where I lived for a year. And you'd load up with the papers you were supposed to have. You had a list of every house that subscribed. You'd ride your bike. You'd fold the papers a certain way so you could throw them from your bike to their front porch, hopefully hit the front porch. Here are famous people who have paper routes. Woo, let's see here. Walt Disney had a paper route. Walt Disney invented the Disney Company. He invented Mickey Mouse and the Disney Company, an amazing entrepreneur. Martin Luther King Jr. had a paper route. Look at that. Paperboy for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He uses funds he made as a paper boy to buy books. How about that? Joe Biden had a paper route. Yep. Earl the Pearl Monroe had a paper route. Great NBA player. Kathy Ireland. I don't know if you guys know about her. Supermodel from the 1980s. Has her own clothing line. Had a paper route. I'm not the boy for the job. I'm the girl for the job, and I can do it just as well as any boy. So she became Santa Barbara's first ever paper girl. How about that? Alan Bean. Not quite sure who he is. Who is he? Is he an astronaut? Kind of looks that way. Lunar pilot of NASA's Apollo 12 mission. Look at that. Fourth person to walk on the moon. See, if you're not the first person, nobody remembers you. Bob Hope was a famous comedian. Look at that guy. Oh, my goodness. Had a paper route in Cleveland. So, a lot of interesting people who had paper routes, folks. Okay, we're going to go back here. All right, so kind of moving back to the history. Of course, radio had a big impact on newspapers and advertising, and national advertising, I should say. I'll mention that in a minute. But then moving forward a little bit, this guy named Alan Newharth on the right there was the chief executive officer of the Gannett Company, the nation's largest newspaper company. Decided to launch a national newspaper to try to get national advertisers. It was color, satellite transmitted to different printing presses across the country. It didn't have long stories, where you'd, turn to the back page to finish reading it. There were news nuggets. 6.6 million readership, 1991. And it's still out there doing well. I think it's got a circulation worldwide of 3 million or so. Here's an ad for USA Today, basically trying to take money from television. So everybody's been trying to do that. So again, radio was kind of killed the national advertisers for newspapers and started to, it was no longer the golden hour of newspapers, shall we say, when radio came out in the 30s and 40s. I don't know what this is that I want you guys to watch. Let's see. Well, you can go watch it. I'm not going to embed it. I'm sure it's fascinating, though. So this is just a quote about folks deserting newspapers to go on the radio. So they couldn't show a visual, but radio or newspapers only had black and white pictures anyway. So it's not like you could show your package in color or anything. So, they went on the radio, sponsored shows on the radio. This shows newspaper ad revenue in the U.S., millions of dollars on the left, and then the years 1950, 60, 70, 80, and you can see went up, right into 1990, 2000, and then started taking a dive, with the internet coming along. And this little piece talks about the fact that reporters have been cut back. So starting with the foreign bureaus, because our national newspapers would have a reporter in London and Paris and Moscow, Beijing, and these were cut back. Instead, there's a wire service called the Associated Press, which has correspondence and just publishes news that all the papers publish, as opposed to the paper having their own correspondence. So that's it. You lose revenue, you're going to cut reporters, and the first ones you're going to cut are going to be international. And this shows the number of journalists or reporters. In red, it's how many are at newspapers. And blue is digital-only publishers. And you can see how since 2007 or so, it's been going way, way down in newspapers, going up a little bit in digital. So this is where classified ads,